On today's Newsmakers, an actor finds Jesus, Dave Deace joins the show, and real-life miracles, that and more coming up. Welcome to Newsmakers, a show where we go behind the headlines each and every week to bring you interviews with pastors, entertainers, politicians, and other notable news figures. On today's Newsmakers, we're joined first by actress Kimberly Elise. She is here to share her remarkable conversion to Christianity and her path to Hollywood. Let's welcome Kimberly to the show to hear her story. Well, Kimberly, I'm so excited to get to talk with you. You know, for years, I've been following your faith journey and just seeing your growth and the things you talk about and how much of just a bright light you are in Hollywood and in entertainment. But I want to get into your faith journey, but I'm actually really interested. How did you get into the entertainment industry? What was sort of your passion to get into that?
It was an ambition I had as a child and growing up, and pursued it once I was old enough to sort of figure out how. I started, I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and grew up in a suburb right outside of Minneapolis, and went to the University of Minnesota. And when I came out, or actually right before, I started doing commercials locally and nationally. And those commercials helped to fund my college education along with my parents. And after I was doing commercials, I started getting into theater and doing a lot of theater here in Minnesota, show after show after show on the stage and touring locally as well. And at a certain point, I realized that I'd reached, uh, kind of finished what I needed to do here and really wanted to go out to Hollywood. So my husband at the time, he's since passed away, and our little girl, we got in a U-Haul and drove to
Wow.
California. I was admitted actually to the American Film Institute in their director's program. And so that's why we moved there that was the justifiable reason to go and further my education more so than to pursue this acting career. But I
Wow.
went through the director's program and graduated from there. And it was probably 3 months after that I booked my first film, because after finishing the program, I said, well, I'm here. I want to go back to my acting now. And it was after that I booked my first film, which was Set It Off.
Wow. And you know, you've had this amazing career. Now, one thing about your story, your journey that I think is so interesting, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but you first got baptized when you were a teenager, when you were around
That's
16.
right. Yes. So apart from my, you asked me about how I came to Hollywood as an actor, but the bigger story for me is my journey to Christ. And yes,
Yeah.
I grew up. My parents were Christian, or are Christian. My father's passed away, and so though we didn't go to church, we didn't study the Bible, read the Bible. We were raised with Christian principles. However, I knew at a young age there's something I'm missing. There's something I need to know, and I don't know what it is exactly. And that's, that truth that God puts in our heart. And unfortunately, I didn't have the benefit of any discipleship, any development, any real understanding of what it truly meant to be a follower of Jesus. And so I quickly went back into the world like teenagers do, and finished college, met my husband at the time. We got married, and then that segues into Hollywood and moving to California.
Did Hollywood complicate faith for you in any way? Did it sort of shield faith? Did it push you further from it? You know, as you had that experience at 16, you weren't discipled, then you end up in an industry that can be very difficult, depending on
Yeah.
who you talk to, for faith. So talk a little bit about that journey and where your faith was during it.
Well, this is the blessing in it all for me, because I was baptized, and there was a truth that I knew. I knew that God had blessed me with certain gifts and certain abilities. And I knew that with these blessings, I was to use them in a certain way. That was sort of the parameter that I had. I didn't know Jesus. I didn't know the Holy Spirit, but I knew that God had blessed me and given me certain gifts. And so when I went to Hollywood, I just knew there were certain things I would not and could not do because of the gift that God had given me.
Wow.
I just believe that he had a plan for me at this time, in this moment, and the history that I had uh, strengthens that for me.
When you got baptized, you shared it on social media, and everybody picked that story up. I mean, it went pretty. It went pretty viral. Were you surprised by the reaction to people seeing your baptism?
I was shocked. It was such such a personal moment. It was just me and my pastor and a friend and a couple family members on Zoom. They were actually on Zoom. And we
I
went to the
love that.
ocean and did it. And it was my birthday. And just to share with whoever follows me my dedication of my life, my rededication of my life to Jesus Christ, I put it up. And I was blown away by the reception. But that's God. He creates the increase, and he wanted people to see it, and perhaps some were moved to seek him.
Oh, they
I
certainly
was
were. They certainly were.
Well, then
I'm
that's such
sure
a
of that.
blessing. That's such a blessing, because there is no other point to any of this than to point to Jesus. And all of that I do, all that I'm doing on social media, it took a sort of a time for me to figure out, how does the Lord want me to use the gifts that he's given me to glorify him and point people to him. And those pieces have been coming together. And it's really wonderful and exciting. And I'd love to tell you about some of the things that I'm doing that point to Jesus, and I encourage people to check out.
I love that, and I so appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you, Billy. It's been wonderful chatting with you.
What a powerful journey. Truly incredible. Next up, radio host Steve Deace joins us to talk all about faith, politics, and to offer a bit of a warning to Americans. We'll be right back with more Newsmakers and to hear from Steve in just a moment. Welcome back to Newsmakers. Next up, we have popular radio host Steve Deace, who has a message for Christians when it comes to faith in politics, and it's a message worth hearing. Let's welcome Steve to Newsmakers. So there's a lot to talk about. A lot has happened in the last few months.
A few things. Yeah.
If you go back a year to where you thought things were going to go politically, could you have predicted or guessed that we would be where we are right now?
No way. I get paid to do things like that, Billy. That's what I do for the Blaze. It's what I do for candidates and causes around the country. There's no way I could have scripted out the outcome of Donald Trump avoiding 94 felony indictments. And one of them, the January 6th, the infamous Judge Chutkan court in D.C. that put how many grandmothers and grandpas in prison because they dared to walk into a Capitol that they subsidize when they were invited to by the cops. Not saying there wasn't anybody that didn't deserve to go to prison there, but certainly a huge amount of prosecutorial overreach. And so now Trump is in the hands of that court too. There's just the idea that he would have missed an assassin's bullet face on
That
by a
is
millimeter.
wild. Would you call that miraculous?
100%.
Okay.
I would not call the attempt miraculous. I thought it was absolutely orchestrated.
But the turning of the head.
But the turning of the head and just how it barely missed by a millimeter, and who knows what the future of Western civilization is at that moment. And frankly, because I didn't think it was possible to humanly navigate those scenarios, that was a big reason why I supported Ron DeSantis in the primary. I thought for our belief system, this was a must-win election. Republicans had not had a lot of luck recently winning elections. The guy in Florida had shown that he knows how to win them. And I just didn't think it was possible for Trump to run for president from prison, from under house arrest at Mar-a-Lago. I think we have to understand the signs of the times. I just think it's pretty clear, for whatever reason, that God has just chosen Donald Trump as a man for this time. Yeah. And I think at this point, to deny that evidence I think it takes more. You're Dana Scully now on the X-Files. It takes more leaps of faith to deny little green men than it does to be Fox Mulder at this point.
I mean, the turning of the head was the thing for me.
Yeah,
that really,
same for me.
And when I talked to people,
I went out and got a Trump sign in my yard for the first time in 8 years.
And you were not a Trump fan? I mean,
No.
you were not a Trump fan.
No, I mean, I've gone from, I was one of the first people Trump offered a job to in his very first race.
I did not know that.
Because I lived in Iowa.
How did I not know this?
Yeah, and I mean, I got a call one day out of the blue in 2013, unknown number. And in our line of work, unknown number means you owe somebody money or it's really good, right? So I answer it every time because I err on the side of go big or go home, and I pick it up, and Steve Deace had my name wrong. It's Donald Trump. And I'm like, am I being trolled? But no, I mean, he wanted to run for president. He clearly got good advice of who to talk to in Iowa. And for the next couple of years, I mean, I had a relationship. He was on my show quite a bit. He endorsed my very first wide release book, Rules for Patriots. He actually had me ghostwrite the endorsement, send it to him for approval. And I wrote my own Donald Trump endorsement. But as that caucus campaign went on that first time, in fact, if you remember the infamous event at the Family Leader Summit when he said, I like POWs that don't get captured.
Yes.
And, I was never a John McCain fan, all right? But, my wife's lifelong military, my father-in-law was still alive, 101st Airborne, and I just thought, I can't support that. And I ended up, helping to oversee Ted Cruz's Iowa campaign instead. And so I've kind of had every position on Donald Trump on the right you can have over the years and not lose your mind, okay, or your soul. And I've just come to the conclusion now that it's clearly that for whatever reason the Lord has intended him to be the man for this time. And I think to deny that evidence, especially after July 13th, is just to deny reality in front of you.
So let's talk about this time, because right now things have shifted. They've shifted rapidly and bizarrely in some ways, whether it's DEI. I mean, you go down the list of all these issues, gender confusion, the way that that's being handled. When you look at that, there are a lot of people who are like, this is great, like we're having these victories. Do you have any cautions or advice to Christians as they're navigating that? Because you can become very complacent when that happens, right?
Yeah, 100%. And it might not be advice that you've heard anywhere else, okay? For the last, I would call this the Bill Hybels, Rick Warren Gospel Coalition era. They were, Hybels and Warren and Osteen were essentially the popes of American evangelicalism for the last 25, 30 years. And over that time, everybody, I wanted to make sure I got a cover profile on Christianity Today. And to do that, there's a specific, and Christian radio, uplifting and hope-filled, has a Margaret or a Lois, all right? And this is the woman, quasi-woke, neoliberal, beta husband, lives in a cul-de-sac, drives a Subaru, has a coexist bumper sticker on it that says next to it, mean people suck. And you're laughing because you know what I'm saying is true, that this has been the target audience of the American evangelical church on every platform for the last 30 years. And so because of that, we have lost an entire generation of young men. And if there's a cautionary tale about the rise of MAGA and Trump for the church. And it is that MAGA has become the church for young men in America. Now, there are some benefits to that, all right? It's teaching young men to take initiative. I look at what my buddy Charlie Kirk has done with young men at Turning Point USA. I don't know that anybody in America has a larger audience of young men than he currently does. And given the message he has for young men, I'm excited about that, okay? But we also have to remember, and this is something that Charlie does as well, but he's unique in that, okay? He's unique in MAGA in that. Ultimately, you can be as based as you want to be, okay? But if you're on the wrong side of the gospel, there are founding fathers that are in hell too. There are men that signed the Declaration of Independence. We thank them for our country, never repented of their sins. There's not an America first wing of heaven.
It doesn't save you.
It doesn't save you. We're doing this in our era, we're doing it in the wrong order.
Yeah.
We're having cultural confrontation and upheaval before awakening.
Okay, where can people find you? Where can they listen to you?
Easiest thing to do, just follow me on X. It's the largest platform in the world, doesn't censor people like me every day. So just at Steve Deace Show on X, and links to our podcast and our show on the Blaze and all the other stuff that we do year round is up there every day.
I love it. Well, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
You got it. God bless.
You can find Steve on Blaze Media, and be sure to also follow him on social media. We'll be right back in just a moment with more Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. For our final segment, we have Pastor Mike Signorelli. He's joining us to talk all about miracles, deliverance, and so much more. Let's welcome Mike to Newsmakers. Mike Signorelli, as always, we've got a million things to talk about because culture right now is in an incredibly interesting place. So I want to start there. What is your current diagnosis of the culture spiritually?
Yeah, people are open like never before. So I pastor a multi-site national church, and I have medical professionals coming to me saying, Pastor, I cannot believe it, but they're doing Reiki healing sessions in secular New York hospitals right now. And although that might offend some Christians, it's good news for us because what it's showing is that even the secular medical community is open to the spiritual realm. And so what we have to do is believe that God is going to do what only He can do and awaken people to the reality that He still heals.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, right? Because there's also data showing that young people are using crystals and they're doing all these things. And yeah, it's terrifying on the surface that they're going into all these occultic arenas, but at the same time, it shows what you just said, that they're open to something spiritual. So the call then to the church is like, what are you going to do about it, right? Like there's interest. They're not atheists. They're not saying they don't believe. They actually believe there's a power somewhere else. So how do you latch onto that and bring them over to the truth, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, there was a dear woman who, a part of a staff at a Baptist church, who listened to my YouTube broadcast on supernatural healing. Unfortunately, she was suffering with MS, which, as you know, is medically incurable as of the time of this podcast. And I just prayed, and the Lord really challenged me and said, Mike, pray for impossible things, not hard, but impossible, which, there's an atheistic part of my brain, even as a pastor and a believer, that's like, God can heal some things, but not others. And we do that unintentionally, right? Where we don't acknowledge it. And so I really pushed myself to say, you know what, I'm going to pray for even incurable neurological conditions, and I'm believing for healing for MS. Well, of course, I didn't know this woman was on the other side of that prayer because I was broadcasting to thousands of people. Well, 6 months later, in my ministry inbox, I received an email with all of these PDF attachments of a medical diagnosis of the MS. And then as I began to read the documents, it was multiple confirmations that all the lesions were gone. It was completely undetectable. And they cleared her and even said, you're done with medication and any medical intervention. And I wept knowing my own unbelief in that moment. I remembered that broadcast. So I think a lot of it is, of course, we don't want to give people, we don't want to give them like false hope or, we don't want to go around and sensationalize this as if everybody's always going to get healed. But on the other end of the spectrum, we don't want to block somebody from receiving what they do have access through the cross. And I'm living in that tension, Billy. And that's just, for me, getting that medical confirmation from that woman who was a precious staff member at a Baptist church was so, it was one of the most liberating moments in my entire ministry.
Wow, and that's powerful to hear because you've been doing a lot in this space. And when I say this space, I mean the areas where Christians are fighting and debating right now about miracles, about deliverance. These are all things you and I have talked about before. I obviously have this new documentary investigating the supernatural miracles. It's with CBN, and people can go to cbn.com/supernatural to stream that. But with that documentary, you also had the Domino Revival, which is dealing with the spiritual realm, right? And these are different forms of the same thing, which all of these things, miracles, dealing with evil and expelling evil, they all point back to the evidence of God, right? And I think it's interesting because it feels like there's a groundswell of these issues. And I'd love to get your take on this. More people are talking about it. More people seem to be experiencing these things. And I'd love to get your perspective. Is that accurate? And if so, are you seeing that in your ministry?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you go to Luke chapter 13, which, by the way, Luke the physician who became an apostle, Luke chapter 13, Jesus is dealing with what one translation calls a disabling spirit, and then another translation calls it a spirit of infirmity. And so the root of the biological problem was actually spiritual, not biological. Jesus cast this demon out, and this woman's able to stand up fully straight. Now, that doesn't mean that every physical condition has a demonic origin, but it's like, how many churches in America have you ever gone to that dealt with the infirmity or sickness on a demonic level. And it's just, because I think there's trends and there's waves. And so for me to be a part of this deliverance exorcism movement, it's, yeah, of course that can get distorted and people think everything's a demon. But also I think part of the challenge is, man, if you have a Christian theology that doesn't ever account for the demonic, even in terms of sickness, that's also not biblical. And so I think what we're living in is like, it's a both and. That's the time we're living in. It's like, it's a both and. We need discipline, but we might also need deliverance. It could be physical, or it could be demonic, or it could be both. And I think that these are questions that we need to answer. And like, your film is so important. And I hope many people listening watch it right now, because it's like, listen, I don't want to serve a God that never heals. But I think but we also don't want to, we don't want to distract people from the fact that salvation is the greatest healing and we're all going to die of something. So it's like living in that both and is healthy doctrine, healthy theology. And I think what me and you have been fighting, and I don't want to speak on your behalf, but is this idea of extremes,
Yeah.
where either nothing can be demonic and it's only Christian disciplines that we need, but the other end of the extreme where everything's a demon. And the same thing with healing. And that's what I've been exploring. That's what my film is about. And we talk about that. We show it. I think that's what your film's about as well. But God is doing something, and it's a really exciting time.
Well, Mike, as always, it was great talking with you today. Thanks for your time.
Come on, let's do it again.
What a powerful conversation. Now, if you want more miracles, you can head on over to cbn.com/supernatural. That's where you can watch the powerful new documentary that we have investigating the supernatural miracles. And if you have a miracle story of your own that you want to share, please go to my website, billyhallowell.com, and you can share the story with me on the contact form. We'll be right back in just a moment with more Newsmakers. That's all for Newsmakers. Thank you for watching, and be sure to head on over to the CBN News YouTube channel. That's where you'll find the full interviews that you saw on today's episode and so much more content. As for this show, we'll see you again next week.